between police and fire, our legal team, around this idea when we have a commercial entity, a commercial facility that is generating a lot of calls for service. And how do we bring them to the table to have a conversation about perhaps changing their orders of operation, changing the way that they do business so that our police and fire are not tied up repeatedly at the same facility over and over and over again. We've crunched the numbers, and some of them, frankly, are pretty compelling as to some of these businesses and the number of times that we're being called down there for any variety of issues, from a medical run to repeat criminal activity. And so we started doing some legal research as to, is there some ordinance you can put in place that basically says, after a period of time and a repeat need for us to be at your facility, can we compel you to sit down with the city and come up with an action plan that would reduce the number of public safety calls? And if not, there would be consequences for it. We found out that there are a number of communities that already do this. It's like a public safety nuisance ordinance, for lack of a better term. So tonight is an introduction to that concept. We're going to frame the challenges or some of the problems that we have in our community, and then talk about what are the legal remedies for it. And then we obviously, Chris is going to run you through that. We have police and fire here too, if you have any questions for them, but I'll turn it over to Chris at this point.
Thank you, Mayor. What I'm going to do here for the next few minutes is just kind of go through an overview of the outline of a chronic nuisance ordinance, chronic public safety nuisance ordinance, and kind of paint the picture of what a potential ordinance could look like, with the intent of being brought back probably for first reading at next month. But as the mayor mentioned, public safety, myself, the mayor, we've been looking at this for quite some time right now. And I'll have some numbers and statistics to show you here that kind of further exacerbates the problem and why we're tackling it. But from a 30,000-foot view, chronic nuisance ordinances are put in place by communities to tackle these problem offenders. And what we really mean by that is there are certain properties in our community that are taking the lion's share of public safety calls as compared to everyone else, if you look for like a per call basis, per service basis for the year. The goal of the city is not to come to you here with some heavy-handed approach to excessively fine these entities into oblivion. Our goal is compliance, our goal is abatement, our goal is to bring these folks into what we would deem otherwise to be a good standing property owner. And so the fines in these are encouraged, again, to take the proper actions for the property owners to decrease the amount of public safety calls that we have to these locations. Usually when we look at kind of the general outline of what the ordinance is, the intent of why it's important, and again, these regulations are all designed to protect the public health, welfare, and safety of our community by helping to abate these repeat calls for service to the same property. There's always sections, and you're going to see it here going forward in materials that I'll send to you after this, about how we define the chronic nuisance. Some communities get very specific about the activity that they're trying to go after. Others are just looking for a total threshold number of calls for service that they want to see stopped or brought into compliance. There's this established pattern of nuisance activity and notice that's provided from these communities with a goal of remediation plans and action plans before assessing penalties. So to go into that a little bit, and I know the screen is a little small, but the activity defined by these communities and how we define nuisances, there are two communities in Indiana that we've specifically looked at, Fort Wayne and South Bend, who have chronic nuisance action plans that are in place. Both of them treat it differently. In Fort Wayne, they look at total calls for service in a specific period. So 12 or more calls for service in a 90-day period. And a call for service can be a valid complaint to the property, whether that's a public safety call or some other co-compliance call. Those calls could all be legitimate calls, and we don't want to negate the fact that these calls could all be legitimate calls. But if we're having repeat calls to the same property over and over again for public safety, there has to be some general acknowledgement that there's action that's taking place in the property that the property owner probably needs to take a further look at, right? And so we have an established pattern of routine calls for service within this time period that you as a council through an ordinance would set a threshold parameter. And if those threshold parameters were violated, then it would trigger this chronic safety nuisance ordinance where you would start with an abatement plan and further fines, as we'll mention here later on in this presentation. The exceptions to the calls that are not counted as repeat nuisance calls, every community has exceptions to this, and I think the intent that we would bring forward to you in any kind of chronic safety nuisance ordinance is that we're not negating somebody's ability to call 911. People need 911, they have to call 911 for help. There's a difference between the victim of a crime inside a property and the property owner who's managing that property, right? And so we're making that distinction and going to try to make that distinction so you know that 150 calls to the same hotel or commercial property for a public safety issue is a general issue that's draining our public safety resources, and we got to find out what's going on and have a conversation with these property owners about that. This is a pretty telling statistic. This is over the last 5 years, and I'll go over some of these numbers because I know they're hard to read, but the top 10 public safety calls for service is listed on the left-hand column. Over the last 5 years, the very top location has had 1,422 public safety service calls to the same facility. Okay, that's 284 calls for service a year. That's almost a public safety call every single day for the last 5 years. And then they go down in order from greatest to least. We do have a number of hotels in that middle column who are exceeding users of our public safety service line. And again, not going after the individual activity that's taking place with the person who may need service, who may need help, but needing to have that conversation with the property owner, the business owner, the hotel owner of why all these activities are taking place within their facility. And you can see that note below it saying that Fisher's businesses with the most amount of police calls average 10 to 30 calls per month over this time period, which is a 5-year time period. We also have a nuanced scenario that we will get more into detail with you as we bring forward a potential ordinance for your review. But on the right-hand column, we have fire calls and EMS calls, and you'll see a list of nursing homes that are on here listed for the 5-year period. And what's intriguing about these numbers is we've had almost 3,400 calls for service for our fire and EMS over this 5-year period to the nursing homes. 3,030 of those calls have been for falls. And Chief Arusa will go into more detail about this, but these aren't generally life-saving scenarios that you would envision your EMS responding to. This is simply a deferment of liability where somebody has fallen on the ground and staff, nurses, are unwilling to pick them up at these nursing homes, and instead they're calling 911 so that a documented first responder is coming to the scene to take care of that. And there are other scenarios that fall within these categories as well. So again, it's having this general conversation of what is a public safety service call, what is a good use of our public safety resources and taxpayer dollars, and is this the type of activity that we want Chief Arusa's firefighters to be targeting instead of responding to somebody who's having chest pains or needing life safety services. These action plans and appeals for nuisance status. The action plan, I would tell you, is really the heart at what this public safety chronic nuisance ordinance is all about. This is having an opportunity to have an agreement with a property owner, a business owner, about the activity that's taking place within their property, and allowing public safety to have a holistic agreement about what steps and actions can take place from these property owners to negate or abate the actions that we're routinely being called out there for 1,400 times in a 5-year time period. And the tools that are available that other communities have had have been having private security being hired, security cameras, lighting in parking facilities, The possibilities are endless, but again, the intent and the concept is that certain properties cannot continue to use public safety as their private security resources, and that's essentially what they're doing by not rectifying or abating the problem. In the event that these action plans are not approved by the city, or in the event that property owner is just not compliant, the ordinances generally call for placing a property in a chronic nuisance status, which essentially means that, from that point forward for the remainder portion of the year, any call for service from a property that's in a chronic nuisance status would be fined an amount. Most communities, I think Fort Wayne was $250 for every call for service thereafter. Again, the intent is not to get to that $250 fine. The intent is to establish an action plan with these property owners so that the property owners can be in substantial compliance of abating activity. But right now, public safety does not have any mechanism. The city has no mechanism to bring these property owners otherwise into compliance with chronic safety calls that they're making and draining on public resources. The timeline for what these ordinances generally look like, using the example of Fort Wayne where they have 12 calls for service in a 90-day period. Once you get halfway there, 50% of your calls for service, whenever threshold the council desires to set, you would receive a notice from the city saying, you're halfway there, we need to meet, we need to start getting into a conversation about what an abatement plan would look like, because we envision that you're going to be in a chronic nuisance status very shortly. That action plan hopefully has a collaboration with all the city departments about the issues at hand and what the property owner can do to rectify those issues. And again, if no action plan is presented or if they fail in that action plan, that's when we'll have the penal fines in place to take further action. But Fort Wayne, for example, once these plans were in place, kind of gave a good time allowance back to these property owners. So for every 30 days where there wasn't substantial non-compliance by the property owners, they got 15 days back from their 1-year status as being in chronic nuisance a designation. So there are mechanisms and tools that I think these ordinances are designed for, to allow property owners to understand that this is a partnership, that we're in it together, but that the city at the same time takes this very seriously. And if they don't, that we have a stick and a fine to be able to come with to try to help bring into compliance. So I know that's a lot of information from a nuanced ordinance, but we wanted to introduce that to you because it is something that we deal with quite a bit on the public safety perspective. And we wanted to start the conversation with council about bringing something forward and get your initial thoughts on what that would look like.
I think it's important to note too that there's probably a likely scenario that you have someone that's in the chronic nuisance category and you put an action plan in place and you work together collectively and you implement those actions. There are still some of these businesses, by the nature of who they are, they're still going to have a lot of calls. Our view there is as long as they're doing all that they can to bring down those, they wouldn't continue to be penalized. Because some of these businesses, even though we put an action plan together and we're working collectively, if they're in compliance with that action plan and we all know they're doing the best that they can, then we're not going to fine them every time there's a call. But if we had infinite resources, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because police and fire, they'd be glad to help everyone who needs help in any way, shape, or form. But when we have finite amount of resources, we need to be proactive in our ability to manage those. And I think this is an interesting way to bring people to the table and have that conversation. So as we said earlier, we have both chiefs here tonight. If you have any questions or concerns that you want to bring up with them, or Chris and I are both happy to answer any questions you guys might have as well.
If we put this into effect, you have the list of the people that are nuisances. Can't we warn them now instead of letting them go and we wait another 6 months?
Absolutely. I mean, our job, would be to reach out to the business community and communicate with everyone that this is what we're looking to doing, and here's the spirit of cooperation and collaboration on it. You know, tonight was to introduce this as a policy concept to all of you, but if we were to move forward, there'd be a pretty robust conversation with a lot of these folks, particularly the ones that we know almost immediately we're gonna be having the conversation. Because the call volume for some of these folks, they would be in violation in about 30 days.
Yeah.
More than likely, just because of the sheer number of calls we're taking.
Can we go back to the slide that had the numbers?
Sure.
For different properties. So, Chief Gebhardt, I guess my question would be the large retail businesses, is that, I'm assuming it's shoplifting, vandalism?
It can be, I think, allegedly, it can be suspicious behavior, suspicious cars, suspicious vehicles,
Okay.
which is an extreme draw on resources, or can be an extreme draw on resources, and we'll talk about that. And then I also like to make there's one nuance out, to think of, a lot of the businesses that are running aren't the owners of the businesses. So they're managers that are in there, they're just day to day. But something like this, I think, reaches the owner to come in and say, okay, we gotta put a plan together. And I think it gives the manager even legs to go into the owner and say, hey, we gotta come up with a plan, either install cameras, install security, what do you do, come and check with the city.
Okay. Because I would see, like, years ago, I was in loss prevention and did all this.
Yeah, you would be well aware of this.
And so what would happen is we would get orders from corporate to fire, you know, lay off, security. And so then what you would rely on is, all right, got them on video. Instead of me going and stopping them or having one of our agents go and stop them, we would just call the police nonstop. And so they would, and it was, at that time I was at Caston, so it was Marion County would constantly be out there. And so they would be, instead of dealing with some of the things that were, I'm not saying it was serious, believe me, I had to deal with, it was serious stuff, but it was, but at the same time, drawing their resources off the street and to sitting in it, because just so you guys know, typically like a shoplifting situation, an officer would be with me for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours, just processing. If it was juvenile, a little bit longer. Then, if they're being actually arrested, they'd take them to, like, I assume Hamilton County Jail for here. And so that means they have to drive to Noblesville, that officer, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, on what the process is. Okay, all right. So they have to drive to Noblesville. They take them into the jail. They have to process, which is another, I want to say another hour at minimum. And yeah, and then check back into service by the time they drive back to Fishers. So an officer's shift is 10 hours, 12 hours. So one shoplifter, if they're sent to jail, which sometimes they just issue a citation to appear, order to appear, but if they're arrested, that can take 4 hours off of their shift. So you've got a 12-hour shift, now take 4 hours off the streets of Fishers to deal with a $200 shoplifting situation. So what we did is we implemented fines. It was similar to this. It was about, somewhere, Chris, you'd have to look this up. There was some sort of legal mechanism we had where we actually fined either the family if it was a juvenile or the adult an additional $300 in addition to the damages that they caused to pay for our resources so that we could supply more what we call loss prevention detectives than to handle those things. So, and that was just theft. I mean, there was vandalism, there's violence that happens in these places, there's stalkers, I won't go into everything, but there's all this stuff that happens in large retail. And so I can see where those numbers come, and you see one incident takes an officer could take an officer 4 hours off their shift. And then however many officers we have on the street for that day, it just drains the resources. So I think that's significant. A call at a nursing home, I mean, I don't want to be mean, but like, that's their job to help somebody, right?
Yeah, we want to be very careful on that one.
Right,
obviously, and Chief Arusa can speak to this, but if someone's in medical need,
absolutely,
we are 100%
right,
going to
right.
move heaven and earth to be there.
Yes.
But if it's transferring liability time and time again, and then we miss a cardiac patient because we're there, that's, I think, and our goal would be to sit down with the nursing homes, with our public health department, with the fire department, say, how can we work together to come up with protocols that would say, okay, these are the scenarios where call 911, this scenario you guys should be able to deal with internally. And if they need additional training, whatever that is, let's get ahead of it versus having these numbers run up where, 3,400 calls to nursing homes and 3,100 of them are for falls. I mean, that's incredible. And some of those are gonna need our people, but I can't imagine 3,100 of them actually need the chief's staff. Other questions on this?
I have a couple questions. So do these businesses, are they doing anything right now proactively to
Well,
help you out in any way, help
No,
our
not
first
particular-
responders at all? Like,
not particularly, like there's, it's all conditional. So right now it's personality related. Chiefs jump in here. So Chief Gephardt and his team might finally catch a manager at a hotel who cares enough to build a relationship with a police officer to try to address chronic issues in that hotel. But when that manager leaves, they may get another guy in there that could care less. And now you're back to square one. So it's very personality driven right now. It's management. So, like I said, there's not many owners of those companies that are in there. We have gotten compliance, but it's through meeting, coming to the table and saying, hey, we're enough's enough. I think this gives us the partnership with the city for us to go in and say, let's set up a plan so we can better not only the business, but our city in turn. And our goal here is not to publicly shame people. We could have put the business names up here. That's not the goal. Our goal is to sit down with those folks one-on-one with police and fire and figure out how we answer those questions and move forward together. But right now, there's nothing compelling them to do that. So if they want to tell Ed to go fly a kite, they can. And yet that night they can call 6 times and we'll have to go down there without any repercussions to the entity. David, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. How many of these calls are by the employees of the retail or the hotel versus just a citizen
Yeah.
call? I mean, is there something?
That could vary. I'll say it's hotels, a lot of times it's the management commerce down there, they have a problem. And I think if they had systems installed, they wouldn't need to necessarily, but we are the hotline, call police, call police, call police, call police. And I think that is through all the businesses, not just the hotels in particular. And I think, like I said, this allows us to go in and have better relationships with local to remedy those situations that they did prevent happening.
Would this give an incentive not to call?
We talked at length about the quote-unquote chilling effect. Would this keep someone from calling 911? Our goal would be that we're really focused on the ownership and the entity, not the individual that calls. So if there's a domestic dispute in a hotel room and someone calls 911 from that hotel room, those folks, no one in that situation is going to be fined for calling 911. But if we have 42 calls to the same hotel in 30 days, then we are having a conversation with the owner. What's going on in your hotel that's requiring us to be here 42 times in 30 days? And would private security make sense? Would better lighting in the lobby make sense? What are the things? So we have thought long and hard about that chilling effect, and we want to make sure that no one feels that that's the situation. And I think by bringing everyone to the table and coming up with an action plan, I feel that that's our best solution so that we don't have this chilling effect of people not calling 911.
So then we're thinking that we could help them with the action plan and not just like leave them.
Oh no, I mean, I think our goal is you're headed towards non-compliance. In the absence of being fined, if you do not want to be fined for every call, you're going to come sit down with us. We may walk your property with you, come up with an action plan that we both agree to. And then if they're implementing that, if somebody calls, you're not going to get fined because we know that you're doing the best that you can. And we know, again, like those large retailers, and Council President Zimmerman, you're aware of this given your previous career, it's the nature of the business that there's going to be a lot of calls.
Yeah, you
But you
have
can reduce.
theft every single day.
But that
in
doesn't
those
mean we
large
can't do
retailers.
things
But doesn't,
to
right,
reduce.
exactly, what they can do though is, like I said, pare back staff, or say, I need to call the police.
For instance,
to deal
a
with all of
small anecdote of this would have been some time ago on a particular corridor that we were concerned about. We had a lot of crime, and we went down there and walked it. The police department did, as a large retailer. I think they had 50% of their parking lot lights weren't working. So there's an example. If we had this in place, we would say, hey, fix your parking lot lights. You know, do these small things that might add up to a safer environment for folks.
I think to me that, to some degree, there's an expectation on us, because we'll get a request of presence, we'll get a request of control, we'll get a request of walking controls, we'll get a request to do what we refer to as decoy cars, where we park cars. This gives us a way to go back and say, fine, we can do all those things, but what is the business gonna do to come halfway with the city and make sure we get in the check? And I think that's a real conversation that needs to be had.
And part of our action plan is educating and training staff on those folks. And unfortunately, there's a lot of turnover, so if we can get them to the table and collaborate on a creative action plan, not only way of buying it, but we document it, so it'll outlive the employee turnover, so hopefully we should see reduction in loss there.
And remember, all of these chains, I'm not talking about like a small mom and pop shop, but all of these chains have corporate security. They may have one person over the whole thing, but they all have somebody. So there are resources within the hotel industry about how you handle guests, and definitely in retail with how you handle shoplifting and violence and all the other things that come along with that. So
And
they
can I?
have those resources. They've got to have a reason to use it instead of, like you said, a manager on the third shift, just like, I don't want to deal with it, call 911.
I just wanted to add, in addition to that, all these establishments have an industry organization, industry association that has best practices in this regard. So for my two questions, number one was, I'm not clear about what an ordinance would provide that couldn't happen now in terms of, can you walk me through that a little
Sure.
bit? In terms of if we have an establishment that is chronic, what is happening now that we can't do now that we could do if an ordinance
Sure.
was put into place?
So I'll kind of give the legal outline to that, and then I'll let the chiefs chime in. The short answer on the legal conversation is nothing. So if you take any one of those offenders up there, if they call 911 1,000 times this year, we're showing up, either police or fire, and we're handling the situation and we're leaving. But the individual property owner or the manager, the city has no recourse over. We have no way to force a conversation that's not anything but voluntary. So we continue to show up and we continue to perform services without getting the abatement of issues that could otherwise be taken care of outside of the confines of the conversation that we're having with them.
But are those conversations, the part I'm not clear on is, are those conversations happening
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
right now and
absolutely,
they're
all the time.
failing? Okay,
All the
okay.
time, yes.
Thank you for that
Yes.
clarification. I wasn't
Yeah.
clear on that.
And what was your second question?
The second question is, as we look at this data,
Yeah.
I think a few of us have asked, like, what are, I would say, calls that we're not going to prevent? That of the data we see here, there's a portion of them that we can affect, hopefully by this ordinance, I think is what you're saying. And how can we discern that? I'd like to understand that a little bit better.
I think it's an input versus output belief. So I think in that particular case, we work on a plan that we all believe by putting these things in place, we're mitigating a certain number of calls, future calls. And we measure it on that. Because, like we said, these large retailers, I can't tell you if we're gonna be able to curb 6%, 12%, 14%, not really certain the number, but the point is there are things that we could be doing to slow that trajectory. And that's really our goal. And I think the way we would structure this ordinance too would be to that point. If you're in substantial compliance with the action plan that we all agreed upon, then if you still have 1,000 calls that year, you're not being punished for that because we know that you've done all that is reasonable to do to mitigate those. So it really is more focused on what are the tools and the things that you can be doing. And then if we believe that that's the right plan of action, we hold you accountable to that plan, but that doesn't mean you're still not gonna have a decent number of calls.
Okay. And then lastly, thank you for compiling this data for us. This is helpful. This is the first time we've been presented with this. Can we receive this in writing? It's really hard to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we're going to move forward with this conversation, I'd love to be able to, I took photos.
Sure.
But I'd love to be able to
Yeah.
spend some more time on this and follow along with the conversation. So
It'll
hard
be
copies
attached.
or a PDF would be
Yep.
helpful.
It'll be attached to the minutes and it'll be sent out.
I think we need to get going on it, is my opinion. The other thing too is what I would like to see is after we get this thing going and we've been into it X number of months, we start publishing those names. I think that will help too. When I was mayor of Greenfield, if you, on the restaurant invest, you were forced to put your grade up, A, B, C, D, F. And I tell you what, those Fs got changed real quick when you had to post, I got an F on my restaurant.
Sure.
And I think we can do the same thing in this. If we've got problems and they gotta post it and it's public record, I think you're gonna get some changes there too.
Yeah, don't disagree. And stay tuned for next month's work session. You might see letter grades coming up.
Chiefs, anything from your guys' perspective before we close out this subject?
Yeah, the strategy that we've used in the past is that we get monthly statistics on nursing home runs. Those nursing homes that have a normal volume of calls, we go out and visit them. And we try to confer with them and get them to take steps to change. This will make them a formal partner with us on a solution. It'll document it and track it. So it helps, right?
Chief, can I ask, why can't somebody in a nursing home help pick them up?
There's a lot of turnover in nursing homes. People fall as a witness. So part of our strategy would be training and education on what is emergent, what is 911, and what isn't. If a person falls and they have these signs and symptoms, call 911. If they fall and they don't have these signs and symptoms, you don't need 911. And what is a 911 call? Fever isn't necessarily a 911 call. Fever associated with something else would be. So that would help us keep our Medicaid's in service to really answer true 911 calls.
I think the other part about that I think we're actually doing a benefit to those senior citizens or people living in the nursing home is if the response is every time is to call our people and then we're having to transport them, they're getting charged for that. When a nursing home, if they were taking care of the situation, they may be able to stay in the nursing home and not get an extra bill for having getting transported. So building those protocols, and again, we want people to know when to call 911, and we encourage them to always call 911 if they have a question. But if we can do some additional training that allows them to deal with the issue on the scene, that would seem to be a better outcome.
That ambulance bill goes to the nursing home, not the patient.
No, it goes to the patient.
Patient, oh.
Excuse me, one last question, and you might not know this off the top of your head. I appreciate that aggregate of the last 5 years. Can you speak to, are there any trends that we're seeing? These establishments, are calls increasing, or is this a flat, like this is year in and year out, this is what we've seen, or is there movement?
I think on the data, with the businesses that you see here, it's pretty consistent over the 5 years. I don't think there's been
I think there are certain, and Chief could speak to this, Gephardt, but there are certain hotels that as their price points diminish, their call volume tends to go up. And so that probably over a 10-year period of time, if you were to look at a few of those, you would see an increasing amount of calls that they're.
There are businesses that a lot of people not have any issue with it, the same business not. So that's that communication piece of, hey, I'm trying to do this because it's led to the business or this area down in the same geographical area.
So our next steps would be to bring a draft ordinance for a first reading in August. And then you guys can chew through the really kind of the detail of, okay, this is how it's worded, here's how accountability is in there, all those types of things. And then obviously we'll be talking to our business community as we move along too, to make sure that there are no surprises as we move forward. Thank you, Chris. And we'll
Right.
email out this presentation to all of you so you have it.
Mayor, I have a quick
yeah,
question then.
sure.
So what happens if they don't pay the fine? And the
Chris?
fine just keeps accumulating and accumulating? What
So
happens?
we'll
if that-
establish this as part of our ordinance violation bureau. So any other property owner out there that doesn't pay their fines in accordance with our system, we'll take them through to Judge Hankey, and we'll have a court order set for a lien on the property with the fine. So again, it's another mechanism. We don't lead off with the stick, but we don't have that tool to implement right now, right? And so by giving the city that tool on the back end to force compliance, to force conversations, to force an abatement plan is the goal here.
I think too, an example of this is our lawn ordinance. We have a lawn ordinance out there that's up there, lawn's under control. I think it came into some sort of fraudulent issue, and we did see that, and saw, we've seen the reduction of those lawns, and then we were able to put in with 13 weeks, yeah, we'll get that done.
One last thing, maybe it would also be important to maybe provide all of the businesses and all the hotels in our community, like a checklist when it comes to like the business establishments and the hotels, like just a recommended practices or checklist to help them, even though they're not in violation or they've not been frequent flyers, but just recommended best practices, you know, are all your lights working in your parking lot? Check. Do you have this? Check. You know, that comes from our police department that, so everyone's kind of like put on notice that, hey, we want you to be safe. We want your establishment to be safer. These are some recommended checklists that we could provide to everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, I
that's a
think
great point.
police and fire are always happy to engage with our business community and continue to do so. With that, thank you, Chris. Next up, Jason Taylor has been working on, I guess, a side project in his free time and really done an extraordinary job. We have a unique opportunity. He's built a relationship with the Indiana Finance Authority that has led to the opportunity to annex significant tracts of land in Fishers. And he's going to walk you through a neighborhood where we're close to having that opportunity and maybe even talk about some other potential opportunities down the road. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor stated, we've been working for the past few months on a neighborhood that is currently under the county's jurisdiction. And you may or may not be aware of it. It is Rosanna Village, and that is on the east side of the city at 101st Street, east of Flat Fork Creek. On the kind of right side of the screen here, that is the county line jurisdiction. East of that would be Fortville. This is about 35 homes inside the neighborhood. They currently are on septic system and they are failing. This is one project that was kind of brought to us by the IFA, which stands for Indiana Finance Authority. And it was generated by some of the homeowners in that neighborhood that are on those failing systems. Whenever I say that they're failing, I'm talking that they are at the point that they are having to go to the laundromat to do their laundry, and they're having to get their systems pumped on a monthly, bi-monthly basis. And so they reached out to the county health department, in which they were informed they cannot replace their existing system. If they want to install a new system, it would be a mound system, which would have to go in a completely different area. So if their existing septic was on the back side of their home, they'd have to put a new septic system on the front side of their home, and it's a big mound above ground, and it'd be $50,000 approximately. And it could range 30, 50, 55. But with this, what we are doing, and we've been working with the IFA on and the neighborhood, is financing that. And when I mean we financing it, it's really the IFA who is financing that with the neighborhood, signing agreements, contracts with IFA, as well as us working with the IFA to be able to do an agreement so that it's all funded at a 0% loan over 20 years. And what that means is for each homeowner, it's going to be, they'll be on our sanitary system. They will, so approximately $40 for the sanitary system service, and then $45 to repay that loan. And if you do the math, you're like, well, that's not going to pay very much. 35 homes at $45 a month for 20 years at 0%. So IFA is taking funds which are called SRF funds, and they are financing 95% of this project for these homeowners and for the city. What will be included in the project will be everything. The abandonment of their existing septic system, the installation of the new sanitary main, and then in this particular neighborhood, what we have to do is we have to install what's called a grinder system, which means that the elevation of the homes is too low to be able to connect into our new system, or our existing, which is up here at Vermilion. There's one there, and then there's another one over here. You can see these kind of blue boxes. They'll connect into that. And so the grinder pump is gonna act as like a mini lift station for each home, and that'll be on the homeowner to own, maintain, operate. And so what we're working with the IFA and the homeowners right now are on educating them, understanding what it is that they're gonna be owning, maintaining, and operating. And then the other piece of this is why is the city managing this? Well, one, to put this on the homeowners would be a lot. Two, we have the sanitary system that we're gonna be owning, the actual main itself. And then three, annexation. They have all signed annexation remonstration waivers. And so what that will end up doing is, upon completion, they'll be eligible for us to annex this neighborhood, which then is connected to Bridger Pines to the south, as well as, which is currently in the city, but Vermilion and Flat Fork to the north are currently not in the city's jurisdiction. On the schedule for this, we're in the phase of scoping and fees. Then once we get that complete, we'll be finalizing the design this year, and going out to bid in December is our goal, so that we can be under construction next year. The timeline for construction we anticipate to be by the end of next calendar year, next construction season, if not sooner. The things that we're looking at right now are just inflation as well as any other project, right? But to that point, we have already had conversations with the IFA to make sure that the city is not going to have to pay for any of these overages. If there are inflation on the bid prices, they will cover that. So we've put together bid estimates, engineers' estimates to date, which is over $1 million to perform this. It's a design, construction, inspection is going to be about $1.3 million. And if, as we get the design further along, then that number goes up or down, we'll be communicating with IFA on that. Our next steps really are to move the design along, to be able to get a more detailed layout for the homeowners, continue public involvement information meetings with the individual property owners, and then work with IFA on the billing. This is similar to any of our MPO funded projects where we'll pay it up front, but then immediately we'll invoice IFA and they'll pay us back. And so just working through that, and then the long-term monthly service fees that will be these homeowners will then be paying and getting them into our system. But I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I think in essence, you know, as I grossly simplify the work that Jason's been doing over the last few months, we have the Swiss cheese throughout our community, these neighborhoods that have never been incorporated into Fishers. And most of the time, the only way you can compel them to be a part of that is if their septics fail and they want to hook up for sewer. Typically, the financial hurdle for someone to change over the entire neighborhood is too cumbersome, so folks just don't do it. IFA has put together a pretty aggressive plan to try to convert as many septics onto sewer as they can. So what Jason has been able to do with IFA is literally use their financial incentive in order to bring these neighborhoods into our community once and for all, which is a great opportunity to kind of solidify and consolidate our community, bring these residents in, and at the same time, they're getting a pretty good financial deal to get their sewer built. And the other part of this is now that we own the sewer utility, we're also adding more customers to our customer base as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to do this, and hopefully there's more opportunities beyond Rosanna Village down the road. Can you talk a little bit, just real briefly, Jason, about the threshold percentage-wise that residents needed to step forward before IFA would work on this?
So IFA has their own requirements for these types of projects, and one of those is similar to what our annexation is, 85%. So they need to be able to get 85% of the homeowners on board, sign the temporary right-of-way access so that we can be on their property, sign the agreement with IFA that they're committing to paying the monthly fee, and in addition, the remonstration, the annexation waiver. So a pretty high number, which is, for this neighborhood, I believe we had 100% that signed it. We've had a couple other neighborhoods, as the mayor mentioned. There were 3 other neighborhoods that we were working with IFA on. One of them had 164 homes. They got 70%. So I even had a call today from one of the property owners saying, what can I do? What can I do to get the rest of my neighborhood on board with this? So I told them we'd meet with them. We'd meet with individual property owners so that maybe next calendar year, fiscal year for the state, that they'd be able to get funding and do the same thing.
Questions for Jason?
How long will this IFA money last, do you think, Jason?
What do you mean by how long will it last?
A year, 2 years, 3 years?
The funding will be for the project. So
Well, I think he means if other community, like, is that money gonna run out and not be available next year if another neighborhood wants to?
Right.
No, it's hard to tell. We've had those conversations with them. Right now, they're at higher levels than they really have ever been. I want to say that they had this year $450 million for the entire state, and we were awarded $1.3 million of it. Next year, they don't know. They're thinking similar numbers on how much they'll have.
So should we be pushing?
I think absolutely. This is unique.
fast as we can.
This is a unique window of time where, I mean, there's always been money at IFA and the State Revolving Loans Fund, but not like what they have currently. And they seem to really be interested and want to work with our team, and Jason's done a great job building a relationship there. The hard work, obviously, is going into these neighborhoods, and for a person whose septic is working just fine for the time being, they're kind of like, well, I'll roll the dice and maybe I sell my home before this is an issue. But for those poor folks who are literally pumping their septic every 2 weeks, I mean, they're stuck. I mean, they are very much stuck. And unfortunately, those homes are getting to the point now where there's more and more of those homes that are starting to see and the county and any health department really in an urban area anymore won't approve of septic.
And we had 3 public information meetings with the 4 neighborhoods, in which it was IFA was there, myself, Jonathan Valenta, and then Hamilton County Health Department, since they are county jurisdiction for all 4 of these neighborhoods. And she was very detailed in explaining that it's not a matter of if, it's when your septic is going to fail, and she highly encouraged them to pursue this.
Jason, this is right around the corner from where I live. I mean,
Yep.
literally right around the corner. So there's some homes that go due west of the neighborhood you're talking about, right along 101st Street. Would those also be included in what you're talking
is.
about, right along 101st?
Everything
So you're
inside this
coming from
blue box.
Flat Fork Creek Park to the south, right?
Yep.
Right along there, there's some homes
Yep.
that go.
Yeah, this home right here
Yep.
will actually connect into this stub,
Yep,
this sanitary system.
yep.
And then, but yeah, all of them, the others will go across because there's the creek.
Right, I get
But,
it. I just want
but
to make
yes,
sure that
every
you're
single one of
grabbing.
them, I believe there are 36 homes in there, maybe 35.
Okay, so with that, once this is completed and they've signed non-remonstrance agreements to be annexed into the city, where does that put us on the threshold for Vermillion and meeting the contiguity
go.
requirements? Who would make it?
We would have contiguity with
So we'd have a contiguity of that, and I don't know if people are aware of that, but Vermillion was something that we had jurisdiction over planning-wise, but yet we don't have them in our city, so we're not collecting taxes on that, because they don't meet the contiguity requirements for annexation, and since the annexation laws have changed, it's very difficult to get an annexation done. I know that oh too well. So I'm highly interested in this, and it's a great find, Jason, great research on getting this thing done, for sure, because if I look at that, and it seems like a no-brainer for these guys to take that kind of loan at 95% and get this type of system put in for, city utilities, and then it gives us the contiguity, then grab Vermillion, which have already signed non-remonstrance agreements to come into the city when we approved that zoning out there. I think this is an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, to your point, Pete. It is essentially this area
Right.
down below here that is grayed out, that is
Right.
county. Vermillion is all the way up through here
Right.
in that gray area, and then Flat Fork is this other gray area that would ultimately be a domino effect on the annexation.
But would you have to stagger those annexations then? You'd go Vermillion and then to Flat Fork?
Well, you could literally do it in the same council meeting.
I default to you guys.
Yeah, we would have a phased approach at doing it, but it would
Right.
be staggered and quick.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And just one last thing on this, Jason, before we move on to our other conversation. For council's perspective, what, if anything, would they need to vote on or consider as this progresses? Obviously, there's a fiscal plan and an annexation. Is there any other agreement with IFA or anything that you guys have contemplated that would have to come before city council?
No, I don't believe the agreement would go through council. It would actually go through our Board of Public Works, as it is similar to
Yeah.
our MPO projects.
Okay.
It'd just be a
So
similar
really
pro-
just the annexation agreement?
Yeah,
And right now, correct, have we talked about a deferred?
no,
No.
not with this particular neighborhood, we're not deferring.
All right. Any other questions for Jason?
Thanks, Jason. It's an awesome talk.
Thank you, guys.
Great work, Jason. Thank you. Welcome back from vacation. Our final item for the night is Todd Succi is here, our building commissioner, to follow up on our conversation that we started at our last council meeting. And one of the things that Todd, we discussed post that meeting was to really start to narrow in. I got some feedback from Council President Zimmerman and from Councilmember DeReamer talking a little bit about this kind of repeat offense of certain types of issues that we're seeing out there. And I wanted Todd to talk through what are those types of calls that we're seeing time and time again that we're having issues with. And then are there some recommendations to try to remedy that so we're not dealing with that over and over and over again? So turn it over to Todd to just kind of walk through some of that.
Thanks, Mayor. Good evening, council. As the mayor said, I'm here to follow up on the discussion. We had a last work session. I did have a chance to go through surrounding jurisdiction and municipalities, ordinances and fee schedules to just kind of get an idea of where we're aligned with those. I don't really think it's fair to compare us to a lot of other places. I think statistically, from a permitting perspective, we line up best with Westfield. So I started with their data. I also talked to a few of their building inspectors, Zionsville as well. I have some friends over there. And from what they've given me and from what I see here in Fishers, our list of common violations are the same. Always going to be trash and debris, overcut studs, damaged trusses, incomplete erosion control. It's the same absolutely everywhere. A big portion of it, from what we can see, is coming from lack of trained staff and the fact that they're asking supers to carry almost twice the volume of houses now that they did just 5 years ago. So your typical superintendent 5 years ago was in charge of anywhere between 3 and 5 builds. Now they're running anywhere between 10 and 15, 17, 18 at times. And from what we hear from the builders, their goal is to just move faster with more development, more everything, just more. Despite the supply chain issues and all the other issues compounding on top of that, it's really putting us in a place where, we may want to consider, a fee change. And going through the similar municipalities, Westfield was set up very similar to us, with the exception that they don't have a progressive fee schedule. So their general re-inspection.
Todd, before you start talking about the other ones, could you remind the council what our fee schedule
Sure.
is?
So we have a progressive fee schedule for both residential and commercial buildings. It starts on the first failed inspection at $75. If you fail the same inspection a second time, it escalates to $150. And if you fail the same inspection a third time, it goes to $500. And then a meeting either in the field or in the office to discuss, where's the shortfall here? Why can't we get this corrected? What are we missing? Are you not understanding the violation? Are you not seeing it in the field? Or you just simply not care? Very rarely do we get to that point, but the $500 fees per inspection type have become very common practice. 5 years ago, we'd see one a month. maybe 2 a month at best. I mean, they're almost daily now. So it's leading me to believe that maybe it's time to make an adjustment in the fee schedule. So as I was saying, I went through similar municipalities, with Westfield being, the most similar from a permitting perspective. Right now, their fee schedule is at a flat $75 or a flat $125, depending on whether or not it's Class 1 or Class 2 construction, residential or commercial. Carmel, they started out, they also are not progressive on their fee schedule. They're at $76. They have a couple of other fee stipulations depending on what type of inspection it is, but it starts at 76 and goes up to about 153 per reinspect, with no mention of escalating fees. Indianapolis, like I said last time, they don't have any fee schedule whatsoever, but if you take a look at where they're at from an inspection perspective, they're failing miserably. They're making about 48% of all scheduled inspections. So, maybe it's something they need to consider as well. But
Todd, can you talk about what percentage roughly we fail of inspections today?
I would say it's every bit of 90%, and I feel pretty confident saying that it was 95. The exception would be footers. Our concrete guys are typically, we see almost the same concrete contractors repeatedly. So they're digging the holes, Lennar uses somebody, Pulte uses somebody. They're very accustomed to the footing sizes. We don't see a whole lot of deviation and a lot of fails there. But outside of that inspection type, I mean, it's probably a consistent 90 to 95% fail rate.
So 90 to 95% of the time you go on inspections, you're going to fail them for something.
Correct. So we've talked about this in previous years. We've even had some council members, ride along with my staff half a day, go out and visit some construction sites. And the same thing we hear time and time again is the builders are using our staff for punch list work. We don't have time to walk the project. We're going to schedule it because the timeline says this is when we should be scheduling our inspection. And then we'll get the list from Fisher's inspectors, and then we'll know what we need to fix. And that's usually the consistent statement that we get across the board from all.
So let me understand this. So make sure I heard you correctly, because maybe I didn't. I hope I heard you incorrectly. So basically they're leaning on our staff to find the errors so that they know what to go work on
Correct.
for their private business.
So I mean, it's not uncommon, and again, like I said, we've done this before in the past, it's not uncommon to see 3 or 4 pages of violations per inspection type. And that mainly, it really is directed at the framing inspection. Their big push, there's 2 things they push for. They want to get insulation inside these homes, and they want to get siding on the outside. So it's all one big timeline. Once they pass their framing, they're approved to insulate, they're approved to side. Usually their finished carpenter moves on it, or their framing carpenter moves on at that point. The siding guys move in. And when we have violations after the fact, that's where the time constraint comes in, because the carpenters have already left the job to go to either another house or for another municipality. If that makes sense.
And so, Todd, when we say that they're failing 90% of the time, so 90% of the time they're walking away with a $75 fee today. Do we put a fee on every one of those?
Correct. We have exceptions for homeowners doing their own work, things of that nature.
Sure, when
But
you
yeah,
work with.
90% of the time, 95% of the time, it's fee-driven
So
inspection.
let me ask another question, and maybe you don't have the percentage, but after they're notified, they get the $75 fine. How many of them get, as a percentage, if you're at 90% or failing the first time, how many make it to the second failed round? Or do most of them?
That percentage stays higher than what you think. It probably still stays in the 75 to 80% range of just failed inspections. And getting back to,
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So the first time, okay, where they're notified and fined, and you're telling us that you go back out, how long
so they schedule their reinspection
they
when they're
schedule?
ready.
So they are saying now it's corrected, scheduling a reinspection with our staff, and 80%?
75 to
75 to
80%
80% is a failure the second time through.
Correct.
And that's at 150, is that what you said?
That's at $150. So I don't want to speculate, but I've also done I've also received some feedback from builders and people who've built in Fishers And it all boils down to the fact that paying that $150 is still cheaper than hiring a private home inspector.
I don't doubt that.
So, I mean,
That's where I was getting to.
We get a considerable amount of that. Now, keep in mind,
So
we're
this
getting.
is the same conversation that we're having with public safety.
Correct.
I mean, this is the exact same conversation, really.
Correct. And it's only been exacerbated recently with the economy because, as Todd mentioned, fewer staff, pushing more volume, and now you're just seeing the numbers continue to climb.
So other municipalities, you spoke of Westfield, and they just continue to roll on. I'm not knocking them. I'm just trying to figure out how everybody else is handling this. Indianapolis does nothing.
So Indianapolis they're just flat out failing at this
Okay,
point.
well.
Westfield has gotten to the point where they only take 25 scheduled inspections a day. A lot of that's their own staff, staff shortages and shortfalls, and the rest of it is they just know that based off of the amount of time and what they've seen in typical violations, they just can't effectively cover more work than that. So you have 1.5 inspectors at 25 inspections a day, you do the math, each visit gets about 20 minutes. So
It has become kind of the quote-unquote cost of doing business, right? I mean, that's at $75, and what I think they've all realized is you write that off as just part of the cost. And I think you even mentioned that some of the contracts now that they have for subs include in the contract an allowance for paying the
yeah, we've learned through some of the transitional employees from builder to builder that a lot of the builders are actually just building in a permit compliance fee into their bid pack of the new home. So, they've just gotten to the point where they're accustomed to paying for it if that's what what'll keep them moving. So 90% of the time, again, most cases we have failed inspections, they involve photos that get uploaded to our system. Once we click submit on that system, that email automatically sends over to the builder so he can log into that system, visually see photographs, and on top of that, as we're walking these homes, we have these Sharpie markers. They're 1.5 inches in diameter, that long. Every single violation we can mark in the home, if there's a wall stud there, if there's a floor penetration or ceiling penetration, they're getting written on those, on the nearest structural member for correction, arrows pointed to them, things of that nature. So, I mean, it's not that they should be having any trouble locating them. There's a photo, there's Sharpies, and then my inspection staff is available, by phone, text, or email at any given point in the event there were issues about what needed to be corrected. Now, in some cases, I know this sounds dramatic, but in some cases, correcting one violation actually creates another. So it's not uncommon to see a second fail, especially where stairs transition into ceilings or transition to a midpoint landing. It's an area we see when they go in there and they start fire blocking or they start cutting and notching. By fixing one thing, so those types of violations, things that occur after the fact, aren't something I'm discussing right now. This is just flat out missed first time stuff that wasn't corrected, after the first inspection.
Todd, do you want to share, and I know Selena wants to make a comment here in a second, but before she chimes in virtually, do you want to talk a little bit about what Chris and you and I discussed in terms of perhaps an amended fee structure moving forward?
Sure. So we've looked at a couple of different things, and I think what we've settled on based off of the way things are going currently with the inspections is changing our progressive fee schedule from 75, 150, and 500 to 300, 500, and 1,000.
I like that, but I will tell you this: if they're already building it in, the only people that will suffer from this are those that are buying homes. You could put it $10,000. You could put whatever, because if the attitude is I'm just gonna pass it off, that behavior doesn't change just because. Like if you set speeding up to $7,000 a ticket, you'd see dramatic, because it would be personally impactful, right, to somebody. I'm not saying that because I'm sure I'd get caught at some point, but you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where they're just going to.
I think the public policy question though is, with this volume of Todd and his team having to go back out there and look at this over and over again, perhaps you're right, perhaps it doesn't change, but at least we could cover the expenses that we have to keep going back out over and over again. So right now you have taxpayers who are footing the bill for manpower and fuel and everything else to go out and look at this, because the fees at $75 isn't covering the.
And I would agree, Mayor, I'd agree with that,
Yeah.
except I would say this, if it's willful,
Yeah.
if it's one thing if it, like you said, if you go and you're fixing something and you damage something else I mean, that can happen. That's not a willful act, right?
So-
But if somebody is being like, I don't care, even if you escalate it, the behavior doesn't change. The behavior's not gonna change, and it's just gonna continue to drain resources, and we'll just keep paying. We'll just add more staff and pay more fine, they'll pay more fines. I mean, the only way you really stop this is you say, okay, you're not building anymore. I mean, I don't want to do that. I don't like when government gets involved like that. I don't really, that's not the thing. But if you're willfully doing something and you don't care about any of the ramifications, at some point you get to the point where you do care. That's the only way to stop some of this behavior, is you get to the bottom root, and the bottom root is they obviously want to make money, they want to sell homes. And I want them to.
Okay, can I say
Selena?
something?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have to leave here in just a few minutes. So first thing I want to say is, I agree with increasing the fines, but Todd, I also agree with you. And my point is that I think, my opinion, it needs to be a combination of both. And as we move forward, I don't think we're the only community that is having this issue. What I'd like to know is there a way that we could possibly team up with Westfield, Carmel, Noblesville, and get a group together and say, okay, how do we address this problem within our communities and move forward in a unified manner with the in approaching these developers?
I think it's always a possibility to work with the other communities. Brad?
My wife told me to shut up tonight, so hon, I'm sorry. But I contacted all the other cities and I invited them tonight to come just to sit in the audience, not to participate, but to listen, and zero responded. Well, I'm not saying that negatively, but I did, Selena, reach out and do that. My personal opinion is we increase the fines, number one. The public companies that have shareholders, when you look at their profit margins, it's embarrassing. 38% profit off the house I paid for? I'm sorry. Slow them down or invite them to leave Fishers. I don't like to give my past experience, but I've been a mayor and I controlled it. I had an attitude, you don't have to develop in my city that I'm the mayor of. You're welcome to go any place you want. But if you're gonna build in this city, this is the way it's gonna be. And I'm proud to say that for the 48 months I was mayor, Baggy threatened to sue me every month. And I think I was doing something right. And the realtors threatened to sue me every month for 48 months. That means I was doing something right to protect the residents of that city. And it's time we start doing that in Fishers, because we haven't for the 7 years that I've sat on this council seat. And it's time to do something. Stop the building, invite them to leave Fishers, and let's go find the good builders that want to build. These builders are forcing, and I'm giving Britton Falls data, forcing them. We all signed a contract 18 pages long. We never read the one sentence that says, you will close when the builder tells you to close, and the homes are not finished. And they guarantee, we will fix that home. They jack you for 12 months, and then the 13 months, oh, the warranty's over, we can't fix it. I can bring you hundreds, not 10, 20, hundreds of homeowners in Britton Falls that have been screwed that way. And it's time the city of Fishers does something about it.
So to that point, Brad, because I agree with raising the fines. I 100% agree with that. The stop work order, just so we're clear, because as we talk about like what are the pragmatic things to achieve the outcomes that Brad's talking about, are you giving them 3 bites at the apple and the 4th is a stop work order?
Yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, they typically get the 75, the 150, the 500. Usually at the 500, I think over the course of the almost 8 years I've been here, I've only had to call 4 minutes to really say, hey, we find you to every extent we can. Why is it that we can't get compliance from this? And, you know, one of the big things I saw initially is very similar to the same thing I'm seeing today. You know, I talked to a couple of people who were building with different builders, and I tried to stretch it amongst the 3 or 4 big ones that we see the most of. And I said, how many superintendents have you seen since your job started? The average response to that question is 3. So you no sooner build a reputation and a relationship with a superintendent that you trust, and he's gone again. And this is why we're seeing a lot of repeat violations as well, is because if John drops what he's doing and he leaves, and Bill comes in here to pick it up, you know, should he have access to it? He does, but I mean, there's
one of the challenges, and Chris, I'd like you to weigh in on this, because we talked about this with Todd. When we're talking about violations of a permit, we're talking about the individual building permit for that house. So they can fail 3 inspections on that house, or the same inspection 3 times and only be out $500. Well, if they're building 150 homes in that neighborhood, it doesn't roll up. It's each individual inspection. And so one of the things, Chris, we thought was challenging is like, how can you look at them collectively and say, well, wait a second, you know, it's not just one home, it's the 400 homes you built and you failed every single home. So I don't know, we looked at that, I don't know, Chris.
Well, Scott, let me ask this question, because we had, when I first got on council, you know, we had to deal with some of these neighborhoods that started which didn't finish roads.
Yes.
So we talked about posting surety bonds to make sure whether they got out of there, that those roads would then be completed and not put on the taxpayer deal. I mean, and I don't know what the number is, but just to throw out an example, you ask them for $100,000 surety bond if you're gonna build 100 homes in there, right? Of some sort, and then you tie them to some measure, how many times you're going in there, whether that's coming back to them or not.
So under Indiana law, surety.
That's the legal part.
Yeah,
That's the part
yeah,
I
this
don't
is
know.
where we get hamstrung a little. Under Indiana law, surety payments can only be for public infrastructure and a very limited. So we have that ability to ensure that they build public infrastructure. Brad's concern about the private owner, they don't allow you to use surety payments for that scenario.
Is there another method then legally to where you could do something of that nature with that? And it's not surety, but you're saying if you want to build homes here in Fishers and you're a person who continues to, you know, tax our resources, because we can point to historic stuff that Brad's talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks, right, and all that kind of stuff for certain builders, then can't you go in there and say, in order for you guys to build, we're going to require you guys to put a payment down of X in order to do that, and that payment will then result to the city if you guys fail X number of inspections, right? You see what I'm saying? There's some punitive nature to it. I mean, it's a substantial.
I really think this is the crux of the public policy issue, because we can change the fines and we can deal with it on the individual inspection level. The legal question and the kind of the frontier of public policy here that I haven't seen anywhere is you looking at it in totality as a builder. Brad's point has always been there that you can, like, quote unquote bluff them and say, like, this is my town, get out of here. Legally, those are conversations that you can have, but they don't hold up in any legal setting.
Right.
And so what we really need to be thinking about is, and this is what, you know, we're thinking through is, yes, we should raise the fines on individual inspections. Yes, we should exercise a stop work order more frequently when needing to bring people into compliance. How do you deal with someone that fails every inspection for the first time, every time, and just doesn't care if it's $75 or $300, to Todd's point? That you have to almost roll up into an aggregate conversation and say, we've evaluated you as a builder, and
You just don't, the relationship doesn't work. It's like in any business. If you have a contract with somebody, a third party, sorry, we're sitting down, I've had to do this one. This isn't working. And you refuse to comply, then that Fishers is not
And I think we would just need to be really thoughtful about the structure of that ordinance, because to Brad's point earlier as well, that's likely to get challenged in court. And so we just want to be very thoughtful about the approach to that.
But does that, would that require an ordinance? So I fully support what Todd just said. It is up to this body to determine what projects and what builders are appropriate for our community, right? I don't think this requires an ordinance, but I do want to know, moving forward, what builder has a track record in this community, and what is that track record? And we don't have those conversations here, and we should.
Yeah, I think there should be submitted to council members before they vote on any new project, that we should see a report. That's just my opinion. And so we can then, as individuals, decide, is this a partner we want
Yes.
for the community of Fishers or not? And I think that because then, as a body here, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, and I know I'm president of the council, but I'm not speaking for the council here, I'm speaking for me. For me, that helps me determine whether I want to vote and support a developer, a builder, or not, and whether I'll approve their project or not. I mean, I think that instead of having to write go through all this, and they can't, I mean, they're gonna sue me? I mean, sue me for a vote?
And
go ahead, sue
and the
me. I don't
leverage,
care.
and the best leverage we have in that moment is at the beginning, not at the end when we're looking at inspections, right? And I just want to add, for me personally, I'm not supportive of increasing the fee structure that just increases the price of the home. And that's not where we need to be right now in our community. So, thank you, Todd.
It's a very difficult balance for sure, but from what I'm hearing from you, I don't know that one homeowner to the next, and considering we're getting 90+% failure on the first time and 80% on the second time, that it's builder to builder. I think they're all doing it. I don't know that there's a builder you can point. I would love to see the data when it comes in here too, but I think there just needs to be some more legal research done as to what potentially can be done, and you kind of hold a very large hammer over their head to get that done, or else they lose that money in like a surety, but not a surety.
Yeah, I think it's
I
important.
don't know whether you can do that or not, Scott, right? That's my
Look,
point.
I think it's important not to get swept up and carried away in the motion of the moment. The point here is to articulate a series of strategies that you guys should consider. And those levers come in different ways. Todd needs tools at his disposal to deal with issues. I don't believe that just because you charge them $75, that all of a sudden the new home that they're buying is $75. Like, they've already signed a purchase agreement for that home. They're not building 500 homes speculatively. Like, those homes they're built. There's a purchase agreement already on those. So I do think there's a value to holding people accountable at the individual level. Politically, if you guys want to sit up here and say, we don't like this developer because of certain past performance, and you want to vote them down every time, that's within your purview as well. And then I still think there's an aggregate public policy conversation about, okay, based on data, we have a structure and a system in place that would allow you to hold someone accountable, that takes it out of the political realm or out of the personal realm and says, we have a system, we have checks and balances, it's on paper, so you can point to something. I think that's important as well as you progress through this, but
I think it's a mixture of all of them.
I
I
agree.
agree.
Yeah, 100%.
I think there's a mixture of all of those, but to make sure that we have all the facts at our disposal is critical, right? I mean, just as a rational human beings here, just to say, hey, I want to be able to see the facts and not the political stuff. I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in, okay, how's it impacting day to day, and am I being supportive or not? Because if we're not being supportive, you're out chasing your tail, right? I mean, that's what's happening.
Couple things. One, to the mayor's thing, yeah, it was a bluff, but it worked.
yeah.
But you're right. I'll admit it. I think definitely we should increase the fees. That will help you hire more inspectors. And we're in the business to not make the taxpayers pay for it, make the builders pay for it. Increase the fees, Todd, and if you need 20 more inspectors, then they're gonna be paying for them, not the taxpayer. The other thing we could go to try to control this is make them come in one block at a time for approval. Instead of approving 500 homes, approve 50 homes at a time. and they gotta keep coming back. And if they don't perform, then Todd, we start voting no on the second block. That would be a way that we could legally do it without worrying about Baggy trying to sue us. Of course, no matter what we do, Baggy's gonna threaten to sue. So that's no big
That's an
deal.
interesting idea, Todd, or Brad.
Yeah, and it just hit me that
It's
that's
kind of like
one
the
way of
platting
controlling it.
process, where you plat sections at a time.
Yeah, that's one way we control it. And if they are not a good builder we want in Fishers, then we vote no on the next section.
Right.
So that's my 2 cents.
So our goal would then, honestly, is probably come back at the next, like, this is the progression, right? Last month, we talked about, hey, we have a problem. We're throwing out some solutions around targeted issues, and I think the next meeting, we would just bring a few different options to you guys to say, okay, what of this policy, you have 3 or 4 different levers here, which ones are you interested in to move forward and progress to passing? Any other questions for Todd?
Todd, is there like I'm assuming that they get a checklist, right? You present them with like a checklist with every house, so like, hey, follow your checklist. Did I do this? Did I do that? I mean, do they get a checklist so that?
So they don't start with a checklist. They start with the knowledge of what the state has adopted from a code perspective. So as industry professionals, they're expected to attend the same trainings that my staff attends. And more often than not, my staff isn't going out there looking for an excuse to fail somebody. They'd really like to actually get there and be able to commend somebody for a job well done or even a job better done. So yeah, my staff is very helpful, but as far as an actual checklist, I think the 2020 Indiana Residential Code is about 780 pages. So I mean, it would be a very comprehensive checklist. But like I said, when we do come up with violations, I mean, we make them as easy as possible to see. It's not spelled out with a code section. We will literally tell them that you're missing fire blocking. I mean, we could have easily just given them section 302.4 and let them figure it out on their own. But if we do that, then
I think it's important.
80 to 90% fail rate is probably going to be closer to
I
100.
think it's very important to note, and I've worked with Todd a long time, just like law enforcement, these folks we trust to have discretion. So when you're talking to a production builder that's building 500 homes, they should know what each home they should, what you need to do to pass inspection, because you've just done it for the last 700 homes and you got 500 more. When you're going out to a neighborhood where an individual is remodeling their home and they're working with a small contractor, that's a very different conversation where you're trying to educate someone who maybe just isn't as familiar with the process. So, we give our people a lot of discretion in the field, and they've always represented us well to have those discussions and discern when is the appropriate time to pull those levers in place and when are they not. Yeah.
And most of these subdivisions are seeing the same 4, 5, 6, 7 models of homes throughout. So it's not like every single structure you're seeing is varying in nature. I mean, it's a repeat and repeat type puzzle, from lot to lot to lot. So, I mean, after a while, they do start to pick it up and they do start to pay attention and do better. But right about the point where you should start expecting progress, they usually leave and end up with another builder or selling cars or whatever.
We've been talking with Todd about construction we haven't even addressed all the other violations. Trash overflowing or no trash in the front yard, is there trash? All different kinds of those violations that are going on that they don't care. Don't care.
So we have about 5 minutes left, I think. Is there anything else for Todd before we kind of regroup, bring this back for the next work session? I think we have our homework to do, so. Great, with that, Todd, that was it for our work session?
About 5 minutes?
Great.